Location: somewhere in Sudan. Classified. Time: 0138 hours local. High above the city sprawl, a Ukrainian drone hovers. It's a large surveillance model, part of an equipment package donated by the US and Britain. The drone has both night vision and thermal cameras, and in the cool of the African winter season, the thermal camera allows the drone to pinpoint its targets with ease. Somewhere below the drone, approximately a kilometer from the target building, a group of Ukrainian Special Forces operators move silently up the residential street. The men's assault rifles carry silencers to limit the noise and the light they'll create in a firefight. But tonight they expect to be using something else to get the job done. Strapped to the back of the four men are rocket-propelled grenades borrowed from the local Sudanese military stockpile. The team on the ground is a two-man sniper security element, along with their spotters. The shooters are set up on different buildings, affording them oversight of the approaching team and allowing each shooter to cover a different side of the building. The targets are located in the east side apartments, and the snipers can see into most of the target apartments through the balconies and large windows. The drone patrols in a racetrack pattern over the target building in a large enough orbit to fly over the approaching assault team. One of the soldiers on the ground is receiving a direct feed from the drone, allowing him to have a bird's-eye view of the streets around his team. Despite their worries, they're completely clear. The locals have long ago gone to bed, and this part of the city has seen no fighting in months. The team is now only a few hundred meters from the target building, and they split up into two separate squads, each moving to an assigned point. The drone and snipers can both observe movement on two of the balconies attached to the target apartments. Through the thermal camera of the drone and the thermal scopes used by the sharpshooters, the team is able to count 5 different hostiles on the balconies. They appear to be smoking and talking amongst themselves. None of the hostiles have any clue of what's about to happen. Originally, the main Directorate of Intelligence had considered carrying out a traditional assault into the target apartments. This, however, would be incredibly risky due to the presence of militants friendly to the targets in the same building. Ukraine's elite commandos can't afford to get in a stand-up fight with an entire building of hostiles. They need to be surgical, hit fast, hit precisely, and get out. They'll have to bypass the opportunity to gather valuable intelligence, opting instead to carry out direct action against the hostiles. The Americans have provided encrypted radios. They're good, but not as good as the gear that they reserve for their own special forces. There's a very real probability of mission failure or capture, and the Americans don't want to give their enemies a chance to reverse engineer their best technology. However, as good as the encryption is, there is the possibility of it being broken, and there's always a chance that the targets have access to equipment that'll alert them to even low probability of intercept broadcasts in the area. Thus, communications are reserved only for emergencies. Instead, the entire strike force operates on a clock, and now they wait. 0156. Twin jets of flame roar through the night air and slam into the balconies currently occupied by hostiles. The RPGs explode in blinding flashes of light for anyone observing through the drone's thermals and the sniper scopes. A moment later, another 2 flashes of light, jets of flame, and twin explosions strike the building. All 5 hostiles are immediately KIA'd by the barrage of rocket-propelled grenades. As the thermal glare fades, the snipers scan the sides of the building. Inside the target apartments, they quickly spot the telltale heat signature of human bodies. One appears to be peeking out a window and then ducking down to take cover below it. From 2 kilometers away, one of the sharpshooters' Snipex Alligator anti-material rifles barks once in the dark. The 57 caliber round arrives at its target 2 seconds later, easily punching through the brick on the side of the building and striking the hostile behind. On his scope, the shooter sees the interior of the room briefly light up as the hostile's hot blood splatters all over the back of the wall before rapidly cooling in the night air. 200 meters away, another rifle barks out, and a hostile taking cover behind furniture inside the apartment meets a similar end. The ground teams now have finished their reload, and 4 more rocket-propelled grenades scream out through the night air, slamming into the interior of the apartments. The explosives spray the interior with shrapnel, shards of concrete, and superheated metal fragments. Under cover of darkness and the watchful gaze of a drone and 2 snipers, the assault teams exfiltrate from their shooting positions to 3 trucks that come screaming up toward them. The government vehicles then speed away. A separate vehicle will pick up the dual sniper teams. The targets in the previous scenario were Russian mercenaries, members of the infamous Wagner Group. Their location was somewhere in Sudan. The exact place and even the date remain classified to anyone but Ukraine and its closest allies. But with a war raging at home, why in the world is Ukraine hunting down Russians in Sudan? Russia's links to Sudan and why Ukraine is looking to break them go back years. In 2023, fighting began in the capital of Khartoum between rival factions, and the world feared a return to a full-blown civil war. Back in 1989, Omar al-Bashir seized control of the country in a coup, which would lead to a secession of South Sudan. Bashir was an oppressive dictator and oversaw the genocide of non-Arab populations in Darfur in 2003. He also imposed a very strict and repressive interpretation of Sharia law, morality police to enforce his decrees, and persecuted non-Muslim religious groups. By 2019, though, the nation was in the grip of ongoing protests demanding he step down. The protesters demanded an expansion of civil liberties and a transition to democratic rule. As a result, a coup was carried out by the Sudanese armed forces under the command of General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and the Rapid Support Forces led by Mohammed Hamdan Hemedti Dagalo. The RSF had originally been created from an Arab-majority militia used by Bashir to repress Sudanese rebels and carry out atrocities during the Darfur War. In 2013, the militia was organized under the banner of the RSF, with the full support of Bashir, who continued to use them as a border guard force to fight as mercenaries for the Saudis in Yemen, and as a private security force to crush rebellions. By seizing control of the nation's gold mines, RSF commander Mohammed Hamdan Hemedti became one of the wealthiest men in the nation. However, in 2019, the RSF joined with the SAF to overthrow Bashir. Hemedti and the SAF General Burhan worked together to establish a transitional government and a new constitution. The Transitional Council chose Abdallah Hamdok to serve as prime minister, and despite working to mitigate Sudan's economic crisis, the SAF and RSF removed him from power in October 2021. This sparked massive protests, both from within and outside of Sudan, with international organizations ceasing all aid being sent to Sudan. This made the nation's economic crisis even worse, and the SAF and RSF were forced to reinstate Hamdok in December, though only after conceding part of his power to Burhan, Hemedti, and other members of the nation's security forces. Hamdok was in effect a puppet prime minister. Protesters, angry at the terms of his reinstatement and the violence perpetuated by the security forces, took to the streets once more. Hamdok would finally resign in January 2022, leaving Burhan as the de facto head of state. But Burhan and Hemedti failed to make an agreeable transition of power for the Sudanese people. Their proposed plan called for a significant amount of state powers to remain with the security forces, in essence guaranteeing that the next democratically elected prime minister would still be a puppet to Burhan and Hemedti. Burhan and Hemedti, though, could not come to an agreement over the future of the RSF, and Burhan called for them to be integrated into the Sudanese armed forces. But both men jockeyed for power over the other in the future Sudanese government. Inevitably, fighting broke out between the two factions. This outbreak in fighting and new civil war is largely believed to be the work of Russia. In 2017, Omar al-Bashir traveled to meet with Putin just prior to his removal from power. Bashir feared his grip on Sudan's reins was weakening and pitched a proposal that saw Russia lending him support in exchange for turning Sudan into Russia's, quote, gateway to Africa. Russia would also gain access to Sudan's lucrative gold mines, a worthwhile deal considering the nation is Africa's third-largest gold producer. The Wagner Group was dispatched to the nation shortly after their meeting, allowing Russia plausible deniability through the use of Wagner as a proxy. The Wagner forces moved to secure Sudan's mineral resources and acted as a support force for Bashir, working to keep out any international opposition. In exchange, Wagner was allowed to set up a gold processing plant and given protection for its merchants by the Rapid Support Forces, who even helped provide security for Wagner's gold plant. According to local miners, Wagner would buy a truckload of gold for as little as $4,000, allowing them to turn a titanic profit in international markets. This gold operation would soon make Wagner's chief and amateur skydiver Yevgeny Prigozhin very rich, along with the Russian government, who took a sizable cut of Wagner's immense profits. Wagner operated in Sudan under the cover of a shell company known as Merowe Gold, which would end up being sanctioned by the US in 2020. As Wagner's relationship with Hemedti grew, the two groups grew closer, and most of the Rapid Support Forces arms and equipment came directly from Wagner. Russia, through Wagner, attempted to set up a naval base in the Red Sea from which it could operate in the area, but General Burhan refused the deal outright, possibly fearing the expansion of Russian influence in Sudan. This in effect sealed Sudan's fate for both Russia's continued exploitation of Sudan's mineral resources and its international ambitions. The Sudanese armed forces and their commander would need to go. It's believed by observers that Wagner, and by proxy Russia, was largely responsible for the new civil war. While both Baran and Hemedti had cooperated with the Russians, Baran did not seem to want as close a relationship as Hemedti, who was growing immensely rich through his partnership with him. Russia, meanwhile, was working with the elements of the Sudanese government to sneak billions in gold out of the country and thus bypass the Sudanese treasury entirely. The nation, most well known for calling Western powers colonialists, was itself plundering Sudan in its new colonial holding. The evidence against Russia's involvement is pretty solid. It's known that Wagner cooperated with Hemedti and his rapid support forces in order to bypass the Sudanese government and enrich itself and Russia off Sudan's mineral wealth. Just prior to the outbreak of hostilities in the region, multiple Russian personnel were arrested and charged with gold smuggling by forces loyal to General Baran. At around that same time, Russian military cargo aircraft began arriving in airfields inside of Libya in territory controlled by the Eastern Libyan National Army, itself backed by Wagner. From there, it's believed that a large amount of weapons were shipped across the border and into Sudan to be used by the Rapid Support Forces personnel. In 2023, the Sudanese government offered evidence showing 16 cargo flights out of the country were headed to a Syrian port city where Russia operates a military base. The flights are believed to have been laden with gold, all used to fund Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. This vital economic lifeline is not only funding Wagner's operations inside Ukraine, but also the Russian military, and this brings us back to Ukraine's involvement in Sudan. In May 2023, Ukrainian head of intelligence Kyrylo Budanov stated that Ukraine would, quote, destroy Russian war criminals anywhere in the world, wherever they are. This came shortly before the release of multiple videos showing Ukrainian special forces in action in Sudan, destroying Wagner vehicles and killing Wagner mercenaries along with their Rapid Support Forces allies. In one video, Rapid Support Forces vehicles and positions come under attack by suicide drones in the same fashion as used by Ukraine during the war in their homeland. In another video, Ukrainian commandos interviewed a captured Wagner mercenary along with his RSF allies. The three men are the only survivors from a Ukrainian ambush against a Wagner unit. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky met with General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan while in Ireland in September 2023. According to Zelensky, the two men discussed their, quote, common security challenges. Zelensky signaled out Wagner by stating that these common security interests involved Russia's financing of illegal armed groups, a clear indicator that he was taking aim at Wagner. The campaign by Ukrainian special forces remains shrouded in extreme secrecy, and other than a few tantalizing leaks, it's largely unknown just how many Ukrainian commandos are in the nation, or how successful they are at interrupting Russia's exploitation of Sudan to fund its war. What is clear is that Wagner forces have been repeatedly taken by complete surprise by Ukrainian special forces, and their continued hold on Sudan's mineral wealth is in question. Given Ukraine's spate of attacks on Russian energy infrastructure, which has been so devastating that the state gas giant Gazprom has reported losses for the first time in decades, attacks on Russian operations in Sudan could prove instrumental in creating a decisive advantage at home. Now, go check out the time Wagner tried to take on U.S. Special Forces in U.S. Special Forces vs. Wagner Group, Battle of Kasham, or click this other video instead.